Errigal, Donegal's highest mountain, and the greatest witness to the plantation of East Donegal. Fertile farmland stretching for miles in every direction, this was the scene of a great movement of people across the Irish Sea in 1610. It began a legacy that has continued on to the present day. Intensively farmed for thousands of years, the natural amphitheatre of East Donegal, West Tyrone and South Londonderry would become the scene of one of the most intensely planted areas in the whole of Ulster. I've come to Donegal town to meet with Sean Browne, a tour guide, who's going to tell me a little bit more about the plantation itself. About what the plantation did to populations and cultures within this part of Donegal.
Well, I suppose to state the obvious, it was a major impact on this part of the country. I mean, when you think on how small Ireland is generally, and especially then when you take, say, this province, the province of Ulster, how wee that is, as we'd say up here, how small the province of Ulster is, and even smaller again, Donegal, you were bringing on vast numbers of people in a very short space of time. And now the plantation was actually a lot of people today think it was sort of better organised than it actually was. It was a wee bit chaotic actually when it started off. Right. At the very start, it really only gets going. You could say maybe a number of decades later, well, Cromwell, say about 1650 onwards, you get a very heavy plantation after that. But even from the start, you're getting huge numbers of people coming into this country, especially this part of the country. Chiefly from one area, the lowlands of Scotland. I mean, it's officially organised and ordered by the English Crown, but the overwhelming majority of the people came into Ulster, especially Donegal and West Tyrone.
The modern-day village of Manor Cunningham takes its name from the Cunningham family, who were granted lands here in the early plantation. Many towns and villages were named in this way, and families such as these undertook to build these settlements and to populate them with English, Welsh or Scottish families. The remains of the Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks in the centre of the village point to the fact that this part of Ireland was a part of the United Kingdom until recent times. Originally in the townland of Maharamore, Manor's population stands at over 600 today and still retains heavy influences of both Scottish and Irish cultures. Nowhere is this more evident than in the collection of headstones and graves surrounding the nearby Rye Abbey. I've come to Rye Graveyard on the outskirts of Manor Cunningham, which plays host to the remains of Rye Abbey. Now, this was founded as a Christian monastery in the 5th century and then converted to Protestant worship in the year 1622, not long after the beginning of the plantation in 1610. Rye Abbey is an example carved in stone of the massive change to populations and cultures that the plantation represents. Having been a major Christian centre for over 1,000 years, the conversion of the abbey to accommodate Presbyterian service in 1644 points to the fact that East Donegal in particular was settled predominantly by Scots.
With this massive influx of Scots settlers, you do get the origins of this, the Ulster Scots dialect, which was very widely spoken, especially in the rural parts of certain rural parts of Ulster, especially in East Donegal and West Tyrone, and not in the Inishowen, right on up until, I would say, actually about 35-40 years ago. It has declined a lot now, but you still do get, a lot of words still used, like especially maybe the older generation, say people about maybe their late 50s up now, would, by and large and round where we're from ourselves would still talk like that, It wouldn't be just as widespread as it used to be, but you still get, quite a few Ulster Scots words, like bray and burn, instead of a wee river you'd have a burn, or instead of a wee hill you have a bray, this kind of thing. You'd still get those words that would be widely used.
Here in Newton Cunningham, the ecclesiastical architecture prominently diagrams the multicultural and multi-faith societies created by settlements in the 1600s. The recently constructed Roman Catholic Church represents a ship of faith leading its congregation into the new millennium, and stands not 400 metres from the earlier Church of Ireland, which boasts Donegal's only example of a lynch gate. This feature is a quintessentially English design and points to the ancestry of plantation peoples. Newton also has a Presbyterian church, and while the building itself was constructed in 1881, its presence points to lowland Scots settlers brought here by John Cunningham from Kilbirnie, Ayrshire, Scotland in the early 1600s. Sites like this were chosen not just for the agricultural wealth, but also for their strategic significance either beside major routes or near inland waterways. Coming down to the shores of Lough Swilly, it's easy to see why new settlers to this land, whether they were people arriving in plantation times or whether they were the Vikings, recognised it as a place of special importance. Really deep inland waterways provided good access to ocean-going trade and refuge as well in times of war. They also provided a very good food source and allowed a very varied diet for what would normally be inland living people. So the shores of Lough Swilly, which stretch out here to the mouth of the Swilly, several miles away in the distance, afforded very good fishing close to home and good transportation. It was an excellent place to set up a new settlement and an excellent place to plan for the future. Burt Castle played witness to the turbulent events of the early plantation and keeps watch over Newton today.
This plantation is, it's relatively recent. It's relatively modern times when you consider the documented history of Europe and indeed the documented history of Ireland generally. Yeah. To use that term plantation or say colonization and say Roman times or ancient Greece or that, but you wouldn't have the same level of documentation that you would have with the plantation. So it does very much, and it gives you sort of an insight into why things were done and even to a certain extent the mentality behind the whole colonization project in the 17th century. Because it does, a lot of people nowadays think, it was over and shut in about 5 years, this kind of way, like, or 10 years. That was my initial impression before I
assumed it was a kind of a blip on the historical radar.
Exactly.
It was over in 2 years.
So they started, say, about 1610, it's over by about 1612. In actual fact, it sort of goes in sort of stops and starts for about 60 or 70 years, you could say. Like, it sort of starts about 1611, and it's sort of still ongoing, really right onto you could say the early 1670s, even up to about roughly the year 1680.
That's fascinating.
You get huge numbers, and indeed the great majority of the Scottish settlement that comes on the Ulster, during the plantation, really comes on at the very end of it. You could say it's the 1670s and 1680s when you get absolutely massive lowland Scots settlement in the province here.
This massive influx of Scots has resulted in towns like Raphoe becoming modern-day centres for the Ulster Scots culture, a unique and indigenous culture in the province of Ulster, which owes its origins directly to the plantation. The Ullans language, which is descended from Lowlands, the native tongue of the Lowland Scots, is still widely used in Raphoe and the towns of East Donegal to this day.
English people and Welsh people moved over here during the plantation, but there's very little remnants of their cultures used today. And Ulster Scots is very prevalent in our area of East and South Donegal.
That's right.
But less so is Welsh culture or Welsh language and the old English culture and its language. Would you say that the numerical disadvantage of those people aided in the loss of their cultures when they moved here?
It would be, I suppose, again, they were kind of, they were very much outnumbered by the Scots settlers. Now, there was parts of Ulster where you would get a lot of English settling in certain parts of Ulster, But again, just the sheer numbers of the Scots who came in, just for very simple reasons, that the proximity of Ulster to Scotland, especially to the lowlands of Scotland, and of course, it made it much easier for the Scots settlers to come here. And then, of course, you have that age-old link between Ulster and Scotland that's been going on. This province is a very, very strong link that way. Just as if you go further south in Ireland, like Munster and say South Leinster, certainly the eastern part of Munster and South Leinster would have a very strong link with Wales and that sort of southwestern part of England as well. So it's just, I suppose,
because they're
geographically beside each other and that type of thing. But very much as well. And then, of course, you have this aspect as well that, Ulster Scots is descended, as a dialect, is descended from, Lowland Scots itself, or Lowlands as it's sometimes called, Lowland Scots itself, which itself is very, very closely linked to the type of English that you would get spoken anyway in the north of England.
Right.
So, I dare say, a lot of the English settlers who came here would have been from the north of England. So their way of, chatting, as we say, exactly, their way of talking, their dialect, it wouldn't have been all that dissimilar in many ways from Lowland Scots itself, I suppose, So the two of them would have blended.
Having talked to Sean, the one thing that I find most interesting about his information is that we tend to look at our relationship between the north of Ireland and Scotland as a relatively new thing. In fact, there's over 1,500 years worth of history associating both lands together. And the Plantation of Ulster is only the most recent event in what has been a long tradition of peoples from both lands interchanging with each other for almost the last millennium and a half. This particular time in history is one to watch when it comes to how two groups of people who were thrust together by circumstance during the plantation begin to get on with the process of cultural interchange and integration.
Well, I would certainly hope so, and it would be very much my belief that that will be the way things will go. You know, I mean, we seem to be a bit slower, shall we say, in this part of the country from the rest of Ireland, and sort of, you know, resolving our difficulties, and there's the reasons for that. But I would very, very much hope, and I think personally, I very much genuinely believe that will be the case, that certainly nobody wants to go back. Certainly the vast majority of people would not want to go back, and we're sort of learning how to you know, respect each other's points of view about history, respect each other's cultures and history. You know, I mean, that word culture is often that's one of the most abused words I find in Ulster these days. Everybody's on about their culture and this type of thing, but very much so, like, I think that we are sort of learning to love, find a way of loving with each other, and not just tolerating each other's cultures, but maybe sort of learning from each other's cultures on the way. Because the one thing we can agree on is that we're all from Ulster, and we're all from, you know, for us here, we're all Donegal folk, and we're all Ulster folk, and some of us might see ourselves as Irish, and others might see ourselves as British, but at least we can agree on that we're Ulster, we're Donegal, and that's a good start, I think, like, you know. I hope anyway. You know.
Sean, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your
pleasure,
time.
Charlie. No
Thank
bother.
you.
No bother.